Welcome back to Basic Binges, everyone. How's everyone doing? I'm Mike Manalo, as always, here hosting for Ms. Marvel, except for last week. I missed last week. Sorry about that, guys. But I know that you guys enjoyed the show last week. Stephanie did an amazing job hosting, as always. Thank you, Steph, for filling in for us. Yeah, we're here today with Mike Lee and Toni Sanchez to talk episode 5. I'll kick it to both of them to give intros. Let's, after that, we'll get right in. Toni, if you'd like to give an intro.
Hi, everybody. It's Toni Sanchez. What do I do? I have a day job that kind of prevents me from just like geeking out full time, but I'm making my return. I am going to Comic-Con. I know we were talking like off camera about like our concerns about returning back to the con season, but I am going to be excited to see whoever will be there for this year's Comic-Con. So 2 weeks, I'll be there. I'll see you there. So hi.
Awesome. Thanks, Toni. Mike, how about you?
Yes, so I am not going to Comic-Con. I think I just registered too late or just whatever, because I had COVID at the time, so I don't know what happened. But anyways, I'm Michael Lee, and I write for the Nerds of Color. That's at LA, and We Live Entertainment.
Of course. And I'm Mike Manalo, and as you guys know, I also write for the Nerds of Color, whattowatch.com, and that's at LA. And without further ado, I think we can get into it. So Toni, you were asking, about all the different people and the excitement that, is happening in terms of people going to Comic-Con. One thing we do know for sure is Marvel Studios is going to Comic-Con, and they're going to, as always, I'm sure, bring everything and the kitchen sink with them at their Hall H panel. But one thing that may or may not be announced, and we hope that there's something that's going to be announced in the future, will be the obvious, necessary return of Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel. And we love our Kamala Khan. We love Ms. Marvel. We can't wait to see her in the Marvels. But before we get to the Marvels, we have a little certain show that we have to finish up, which is Ms. Marvel, the 6-episode run of Ms. Marvel. And last night was the second to last episode, which we are here to discuss today, which I'm really psyched about and really pumped about. I think we want to start, before we dive into the episode and all of its details, I'd love to get overall thoughts from everyone. Mike Lee, we'll start with you. What were your overall thoughts of episode 5?
The penultimate episode is by far my favorite of this 6-episode arc. It really gets into the history behind the partition and the gravity of the situation and the tragedy of the situation, which we can kind of see right now too, with separation of families and the religious angst between Hinduism and Muslims as well. So it's a little bit of history, but it's also a reflection of the world that we live in today. But there's also romance too and heroism. So there's some uplifting moments. It's not all dark. And in the end, I just liked it. But there's one part of it that just disappointed me the most. It was spending those last few minutes, which should have been a mid-season or a mid-credit scene. I think that if they just chopped that and took it to a mid-credit scene, I would have been happy with it. But overall, I loved the episode.
Awesome. Toni, what about you? Overall thoughts?
I cried my eyes out. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I cried my eyes out in this episode. By far, I agree with Mike that it's by far my favorite episode that I've seen so far. It's so good that I think that even if next week's finale, if it ends up being underwhelming, which is a real possibility, just given the fact of these Disney Plus shows they've had an issue with with sort of nailing the end and sticking the landing. Even if that were the case, I feel like I would still hype up the first season purely on the strengths of episode 5. That I would tell people, like, get through the first 4, it can be a lot sometimes, or the pace can be uneven, but episode 5 makes it all worth it. And yeah, you know, maybe if the finale isn't everything that I want it to be, I'll still be like, it's so worth it. So I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping next week I can, you know, that we'll all be able to say like, that was amazing and awesome and it's the best thing we've ever seen. But yeah, overall, I just think that it was an incredible. I was really concerned about how are you going to fit so much history. Like we keep hearing about like this, like, you know, this great grandmother. We keep hearing about, you know, this, you know, beautiful love story between her and the great grandfather, and, you know, just sort of like bits and pieces here of, you know, Sana, the daughter, but Kamala's grandmother, kind of like alluding to things that she barely remembers when she's a very, very small child. And I think tying it all together the way that they did, I mean, I'm still blown away by the way that they were able to do it. And I mean, I don't know why I'm so blown away, just because it definitely fits the Disney Plus trend they tend to do, where it's like they put all their eggs into one basket of usually 1 or 2 incredible episodes, right? And so I should have known going into this that this was going to be like just a completely like, you know, earth shattering like episode. Like the fact that like I'm being exposed to this a completely new story that I don't know if this story was like reflected at all within the comics. I don't think it was. And the fact that, you know, I'm just so invested and engrossed in these folks that I only knew through conversations, you know, and their names being sort of whispered in passing. I think it's remarkable the fact that I end up so invested in just not even the full episode. It's only about like, I think 20-30 minutes of real story time. And that's crazy. So yeah, big fan, loved it.
That's awesome. I'm really glad that you guys did like it. I do think it is arguably the most powerful episode of this series so far, and one of the most powerful hours of, you know, the MCU that we've seen to date. I can't agree with you guys more on that. I will say this. I have criticisms about the episode from a pacing standpoint, I think. And it's not so much the episode itself as it is the series, I think. Overall, you know, my biggest concern, and I'd love to see what you guys think about this. We've seen it with every single Disney Plus show so far that the MCU has put out, where you have this amazing setup, and this episode's no exception as well. We've got an amazing setup, but as soon as you get to the present, things just get rushed. And I felt this episode was no exception. Everything with the clandestine, you know, and that storyline, everything in the present, I felt got really, the rift that was created and everything like that, it got resolved in a way that for me was very unsatisfying and very like, well, we just have to solve this really quickly so that we can get to the next one. And I want the show, and if there's one thing that I really, really hope Marvel Studios and Disney Plus take away from this, it's to give us maybe 8 to 10 episodes for a series rather than 6 episodes, because, you know, we're already, even you, Toni, like you said, oh, okay, people have to get through episodes 1 through 4. That's majority of the series, you know, that's majority of the series already. And then we're just starting to already resolve things. But I feel like there's so much more story to tell here, that I wish that they didn't rush everything. Even the stuff during the partition, you know, with Aisha, Aisha, I believe that's her name, the great grandmother, Aisha, yeah. Aisha and Hassan. I wish that we spent more time with them, you know, like we got very, very brief like time with them, and it's such a powerful love story and powerful issues happening, you know, really devastating moments in this episode that are just gorgeous and beautiful and heart-wrenching, but we get just a small amount of time with them, and then they feel obligated to bring us back to the present, which they have to, because you have 1 episode left to resolve everything. And I think that is the quintessential Disney Plus MCU problem. I think this episode really enhanced that 100% and just reinforced and reemphasized that issue. So that's kind of my big concern with it. Did you guys feel the same way? What'd you guys think?
Yeah, I honestly could care less about all the superhero stuff, all the clandestine stuff. I know how it tries to tie itself into the partition story. But honestly, I just really don't care how they got here. Honestly, it's like they said they got here. It's like, how exactly did they get here? I don't really care. I don't care if they get back. It just doesn't matter to me because I'm so interested in Kamala's story, or her family lineage and everything like that. So that's more of the stuff that I'm interested in. And yes, the superhero stuff is so much fun, especially since it's a Marvel thing, and Marvel's constantly giving out the hits. It's just that it's not cohesive enough for me to be interested in what the superhero aspect of this is. And that's what it takes me back to the ending, because it's just like we're so invested in this story. Finally Sansa, Mubina, and Kamala get together. They find this kind of, I guess, closure, because there's this family rift. And then all of a sudden we have to go pay attention to Kamran and Bruno. It's like, why do we have to go back to them after we spent so many minutes invested in watching this show? Crying our eyes out, as Toni just said. It's unnecessary to go back to that world, that present time, or even that aspect of Jersey. So I was that's just my thought.
Yeah, it does feel like they're trying to squeeze in 2 seasons worth of storylines just within not even a full season, but like in a very few short episodes. Because I really do feel like I get it, like it's Disney Plus, they don't know. I think they know up to a degree like what they can count on, and whether or not these characters are then going to be springboarded fully into the cinematic universe and never return back to Disney Plus, or if they're only going to be isolated and relegated to a TV show, and maybe you get a cameo here and there within a future MCU film. But it just feels like season 1 of Miss Marvel probably should have just stuck to a sort of like street level New Jersey storyline. And then season 2 could have been something with the clandestines and how it now has to become about Kamala learning more about her family and about, the history about, this bangle. What is the bangle? We still don't know.
Yeah.
We still don't know.
Yeah.
We just know that they Indiana Jones did out of a cave, was attached to some like severed limb, and we're never given any explanation about it. I doubt we'll get any explanation for it next week. And there's a part of me that's fine. I can go along with it, because again, it's being carried on, this episode definitely, and definitely on the performances of its series regulars. Like Iman, is so great that I'm just like, they could do anything with this character and this actor, that I have so little expectation that whatever they give me, I'm just like, I'm ready for it. But yes, I feel like season 2, if they had gone ahead and stretched it out to like just Kamala figuring out her powers, really it becoming sort of a Miss Marvel / Peter Parker like story, where it's just them coming of age, figuring out their powers, figuring out how to just even navigate it. Even when, spoilers, we're doing spoilers, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Full
great.
Spoilers, by the way, for those watching.
Okay, great.
If you started watching this video not expecting spoilers, but this is a recap of the episode, then you shouldn't have watched this.
Right. So like,
hours, guys. So
even just the fact at the end of the episode, her mother finds out about her abilities, that feels like a season 2 move. It doesn't feel like an episode 5, season 1 move at all.
Yeah.
So it just, I feel like we could have kept these clandestines, that whole story about like interdimensional travel, the great grandmother and the grandmother going back to Karachi, going back and actually analyzing really what it is. It's generational trauma. And then even to some extent, reconnecting with her family and her culture and the history that's behind that culture. It does feel like we're dropped in it very, very soon, but it's still good. It's still great.
It's still good. Yeah.
But I definitely agree with you. There are pacing issues, and there have been pacing issues. And I think that's just something I've just come to expect at this point with Disney Plus shows, all Disney Plus shows, regardless if it's in the Marvel stable or Star Wars or anywhere else. If it's a Disney Plus show and it's like a full on narrative, like, yeah, I just expect that this is going to be a little wonky. It'll be good and the ride will be awesome by the end. But yeah, on the way, it's just kind of like, oh, okay. Ooh.
Mike, you were about to jump in as well, right? You gave your analysis, but I think you had something that you wanted to say.
No, actually,
no?
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So here's my take on that, if I may, Toni, and forgive me, I know that we should be focusing a little more on Ms. Marvel and not the nature of Disney Plus shows in general.
Sure.
You mentioned that you've come to expect it from Disney Plus shows. The question that I have is, do we have to? We shouldn't have to. I think people, we the Disney Plus model is such that folks need to come up with a way, showrunners need to come up with a way to better pace their shows and their storytelling, in my opinion. Not to take anything away from Bilal Ali, who's just done an amazing job, or Bisha Ali, I forgot her. Sorry. Horrible. Bisha. It's Bisha Ali, right?
I think so.
Sorry. Yes, Bisha Ali and her show running has been, it's been excellent here. Don't get me wrong. She's done a terrific job. My issue is there's a lot of really, really good stuff here, to your point, Toni, that I think could have been split up into 2 seasons. You're right. Like, such great ideas involving, and Mike, to your point, everything about Kamala's family, like, is so interesting. It really, really is wonderful to know. And I'm so glad that we got a lot of that in this season. I think you could have done an entire season about this. I think you could have had an entire season centered on it. And then, Toni, to your point, like, have a New Jersey centric season, this season being her discovering her powers, all of that. It might be a little cookie cutter, but what's kind of selling you is cookie cutter is fine if the characters are engaging and amazing, which they have been. Kamala's mom, Maniba, her dad, her brother, her sister-in-law, Bruno, Nakia. These are really interesting characters that I really, really enjoyed engaging with. And I could see an entire season just centered on teenager problems. Of course, it kind of goes back into endgame territory, but when you're a Muslim teenager and damage control is coming after you, you have an opportunity to deviate from the homecoming formula by exploring something super central to Kamala, which is the Islamophobia aspect of the Muslim culture and the issues that this country has with that. And they have done such a great job with that here, especially in those first 3 episodes. But then to kind of deviate from that and then give us this, backstory about Aisha and Hassan, it feels like a season 2 idea that's condensed and stretched that's condensed and shrunk to fit 1.5 episodes, or maybe 1 episode, because it's like half an episode here, half an episode there. When it should be a season, and I kind of wish that they took their time to kind of do something like that. Even Maniba discovering Kamala is nightlight. We're never going to use that term, but technically that's what they call her so far. That feels like a season finale moment, in the same way that Buffy's mom, Joyce, found out that Buffy was a Slayer at the end of season 2. Right. Where do we go from there in the next season? If Maniba found out that Kamala was Ms. Marvel at the end of this season, after she's established her Ms. Marvel identity, that opens up the door to exploring more about Maniba's family's history. And there's your season 2, which is kind of what we got here. I just wish we took that time, like, instead of kind of trying to throw all of this into a blender and kind of shortchange all storylines, as a result of that, and that's kind of the shame of it.
I think I totally agree with everything you just said. And I think the reason I feel that way is just because on season 3, listen to me, episode 3, it's the wedding episode.
Yes.
Thus far, while I absolutely love so many things about episode 3, to me, it is the weakest. especially in terms of like how it's connecting these threads of, oh, here's my when Kamala is just meeting the clandestines for the first time, trying to figure out what that means. By the way, Bruno does some like nifty mathematics real quickly off screen in order to figure out like, hi, you might destroy the world by sending these folks home. And also you got to get to your brother's wedding. And at the same time, you have to have this weirdly paced confrontation at the wedding. And then damage control just so conveniently just doesn't check the corner that you and Bruno are hiding in, and you're able to get away. Like it's just, to me, it does feel like they had an idea for Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, but they had no way of really connecting those in a really like meaningful way that felt smooth and that felt like this was all leading to a place. Because by the time that you actually like, you mean she got on a plane just because the grandma was like, you have to come to Pakistan right now? Like that. Like, is that something
very random, right?
Like, is that the power of like Pakistani grandparents that they can just say like, you have to get here now, even though you just ruined your brother's wedding? And they're the only ones that go. That's also what's crazy to me. So it just feels like, okay, at this point, it's plot armor. They're just making decisions because they have to get her there, but they don't actually do it in a way that feels real. All of a sudden, it's like these parents are set up, and especially Maniba is set up to be this incredibly overprotective mother who is, you know, hanging on too tight by her own admission. And yet she has no problem with putting herself and Kamala on a plane to Pakistan without the brother and the father. And I'm very like this, sure, yes, that can happen, especially in a show about superheroes and interdimensional beings. And like, I get it. Like at a certain point, you just have to suspend the disbelief and go. And believe me, I'm there. But at the same time, if I stop long enough to actually be like, okay, what is actually happening? Some of it does fall apart. And I think it does fall apart, not because of the decisions of where it wants to go, but just in how it chooses to get there. Yeah. And it's a very conflicting feeling because you're like, I'm enjoying where we ultimately get to, but the way to get there is just, it doesn't feel me.
It's the execution, right?
Right. It doesn't fill me with good feelings. So I definitely feel you on everything that you stated about the pacing and just the choices that they're making.
Mike, anything to add?
About the pacing now that Kamran's mom is, we don't even know what she gave, I guess, her gift or whatever. The pace of that moved is like, wow, he just got the powers all of a sudden.
Can I pause you right there and just ask, can anyone explain what the hell happened in that moment?
I don't even understand.
Power of love that was in him all along found him.
That's all it took for the rift to like close up.
Yes.
She says his name.
So it was one person, that one of her henchwomen that went up to it. Didn't work, I guess, and whatever was inside of her, I guess, was enough to release that ethereal energy and move at light speed, I guess, 12 parsecs or so, and then
what was in her? They never explained that. Right?
They never explained. That's the thing. That like they go so fast and they overlook these like essential like details that that would help fill in the gaps and help us understand who the clandestines are. But we still even don't know who they really are.
No, and we'll never get that answer. Which is unfortunate.
All we know is they were inside that temple, which had the 10 rings emblem. Which still doesn't explain why they were there. Like, what's the connection between the bangle and the 10 rings? It's just, are they just throwing it out there? I want to believe that they're just throwing it out there.
It's just an Easter egg.
It just doesn't. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. What's going on? To be honest,
like that whole storyline doesn't make sense, and it's kind of a pity because Nimra Busha, who plays Najma, she's a great actress. You could tell she got a power to her, and every scene she can go from sweet and you buy it to menacing and you buy it. But the problem was they didn't give her the breathing room for her character to transition from here to there and then back to sweet again. It's just kind of flip-flopping decisions with the character. And I literally wish that we understood her deal and the characters deal a lot more, anything with these characters a lot more, because they've got such good actors behind them. Don't waste them, guys. Come on, like give us a legitimate storyline. I cannot for the life of me explain really what happened with the rift and everything like that, because one moment one of the clandestine gets burnt up and shriveled up. I'm kind of like, what about Namja makes her special, and what about Cameron's name closes the rift? I don't think any of that is going to be explained in episode 6, because I think they've got so much more ground to cover, that they can't stop the momentum of the present storyline, the super heroics, as you put it, Michael, to explain all that. So I'm kind of like, you just needed a way to wrap it up, and that's what you did. That's where the episode disappointed me a bit. And by the way, I promise to everyone who's watching, we will shift from the negative to the positive, because there's so many great positives about this episode
there are.
I want to cover. But this will be our last gripe about the negative stuff. I'm sorry. Anyways, but yeah, Mike, what were you gonna say? Sorry.
Oh, because now she has there are other henchmen, right? There's like a couple, one with the hammer and then one with the bladed belt. So are they just gonna disappear, or because they wanted to get home too, but there was like an urgency for them to get home, but now what's happening? What's gonna happen to them?
I guess no one cares about going home anymore.
Yeah, I was like, oh well, she's dead. I'll go. Just
damn it, the door that we chose to go through is just burning us. I guess we can't go home anymore. Oh well.
We should have studied more about this.
I you guys are familiar with hard magic versus soft magic, right?
No.
Please.
So,
yeah.
I forget the guy who came up with the term, but basically what it amounts to, and the difference between a hard magic versus soft magic, is that hard magic has definitive rules versus soft magic, which is just sort of like this unknowable thing that just kind of like F's everything up for your protagonist. So like, for example, the force would be something for, would be a soft magic, right? Because it's not really this thing with like hard and fast rules. It just seems to be this like amorphous thing that like seems to connect things all together. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not. And Harry Potter, for example, has like hard magic where it's like you wave the wand, you say the words, and it does a thing, right? So that's why with the Harry Potter magic system, we tend to really like get into it and believe in it, because it's like that's something that's been defined. We understand what the rules are. We understand that there's ways to bend those rules, but by and large, we all start out with just a very baseline understanding of like how magic works within that universe. And every like fictional system and fandom has their own version, of whether or not they have a hard magic or a soft magic. Usually they have both. So here, it's nothing but soft magic. There's no explanation whatsoever of how any of this shit works, where the bangle came from, where the power that is actually infused in the bangle comes from, how the door opens, why the folks are just like getting ripped apart and turned into Mortal Kombat skeletons just by like approaching it. The power of love that seems to find Cameron by when his mom just gets eviscerated. Yeah, so like we don't understand, or even the way that Kamala's powers really work. We haven't been given a definitive answer as to like the difference between when it works and when it doesn't. Right? It just kind of seems to be it works when it does. And that's fine. We're still kind of like we understand it to be like, well, that's because she's still new to her powers. So she hasn't really like gotten it on lock yet. Like, does she just believe really, really hard? Is she like in a moment of Zen? Like, we don't really know how it works. We just know that it does when it does and it doesn't when it doesn't. So when it comes to something big enough where it's supposed to be this like huge problem for anybody, like, hi, you might die, you might end the world, you might do any number of dangerous things if you choose to use, this magic, this, bangle, whatever it is, in this certain way. That's when we tend to kind of like, okay, like that doesn't work. You can't just gloss over that and then move on to the next episode, but it's what they're doing. And that is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. It's messy. And it's like, it would have taken for all the time that we had to focus on other things, and not that they weren't important things for this show to focus on, but it's like, we've had the time for them to kind of like get some answers, especially when they have the whole Mr. Miyagi scene with Waleed in Karachi with the red daggers. Like, we finally thought like, we're going to get some answers.
I thought we were.
We got a answer. We got a nifty hologram of like how, the clandestine's world and our world just kind of like sits on top of one another. Okay. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's like, but if they merge, and all of a sudden it's Mortal Kombat. It's Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Like, all of a sudden it's the worlds that are going to merge on top of one another, and our world will be the one to suffer for it. So it's just, I really wish that they would just explain the magic long enough for us to establish some sort of rule, but I get it. The MCU is still fairly nascent whenever they're talking and using magic and how to employ that.
This is why, to be honest, I love that you called that out, because, and forgive me, I don't want to come off as, oh, I'm a purist and you have to do everything like the comic book, et cetera, because you don't. And what they decided to do with the light and everything like that within Kamala it's lovely. I can't deny that. But because you are making up a new set of rules, something that's not established in the comic books, it kind of feels like you're sort of making it up as you go. And I think if you sat down and really kind of hashed out, we have 6 episodes to go. Here's what we want. We want Kamala here at the beginning. We want Kamala here at the end. We want her powers to be this at the beginning and then defined here at the end. Here are the specific answers that we want to give and when we want to give them, because we only have 6 episodes to do this. I feel like you could have had a little bit more cohesion between the episodes and the story elements. And also, to your point, Toni, we would have had harder magic rules, because they would have nicely defined what the skill sets are and why they are the way that they are, and how they, what the limitations are, everything, the rules, essentially. But it sort of felt like, because they didn't have enough time, maybe they didn't have a whole lot of budget, they're kind of pulling an original idea out which they've never created before. It sort of felt like they were making things up as they went with her powers. And that's why I was kind of like, if you guys stuck to Embiggen, you have one rule, which is Embiggen. That's it.
Right. Well, the problem also becomes that, and it's something that I've noticed and I've always had a question about whenever I go see these MCU movies, it's like, how much of this film actually has a gap that I'm filling in subconsciously because of my comic book knowledge. Like, and to me, up to a certain point, I'm always like, I always appreciate when we don't have to spell everything out for an audience that is completely unfamiliar, because then it just feels redundant to me. But that's a completely selfish thing. But the drawback of that here is that because they have it's not like us comic book nerds could be like, well, actually, that's because of of comic issue number whatever, and this comes from that. Like, now we have no way of filling in those gaps.
Yes.
Now the criticisms are going to be not only justified, they were always going to be justified and valid, but it's also going to be like, this is going to be a real problem for y'all. Because before, when you could just skip over steps and you could skip over motivations and not spell everything out for your Infinity Saga characters, most of that stuff was already within a comic book. You could go ahead and say like, well, the reason why Tony Stark is acting the way he is because of his issues with this person, or because of, the storyline that's explored within this arc. And now we're just kind of left here like, well, what the F? Like, it's not in the comics. You're only on season 1. We have no way of knowing like when those gaps are ever going to be filled. Probably never. So it's just, I feel you. It's super frustrating. And that sucks that we're so hung up on it, because again, I cannot stress this enough. The episode is so good. It's so very really good. Episode. It's so amazing. I was really taken aback by like how powerful it was, because the amount of things that I did not grow up around. I grew up in a small town in South Florida. I grew up with Mexicans, Black people, Haitians, and a smattering of folks from like the Latin America and the Caribbean, right? There was maybe about 20 white folks in my entire high school, right? But that also meant that I didn't grow up with a lot of other groups. So I have no understanding of like, the Pakistani culture, the Muslim religion, that cross section, especially those historical major events that definitely we were never taught in public American schools. So like learning about the partition, me getting on, the internet and trying to find out what I can just so that way I'm not so ignorant about it, especially when I'm being invited to talk here with you guys. Like, one, it was like again, I'm not like the person that can really judge as to whether or not they did that specific historical moment any kind of justice, but as a viewer, as a comic book enthusiast, and definitely as an MCU enthusiast, it really did feel like I've never seen this before, not only in the MCU but nowhere else in pop culture. I've never felt this moment of like seeing a beautiful love story and actually being exposed to this specific culture and this specific moment in time. And maybe I'm just not reading and watching the right things. But it definitely does its job. It makes me want to know more. It makes me invested within the characters. It definitely informs my understanding of the protagonist. The episode is amazing and great. So I don't want anybody to feel like because we're just harping on some of the things that we don't like with the series as a whole, that somehow the episode is somehow not, even though there are definitely criticisms that we can throw at it.
That does bring up a really good point, and it's a point that you brought up earlier, Mike. It's hard for us to care about the superheroics, and that's what we're criticizing, is the superheroics part. But if we're spinning this towards the positive, because it's such a beautifully done and powerful episode, I think that it's okay for us to downplay the heroics. It's okay for the show to downplay the heroics, because we've got such a magnificent and wonderful and beautiful cultural and historical story here. And that, I think I would love to focus on that because of how wonderful it is. Toni, to your point, I think, this is something that we haven't really seen, not just in the MCU, but in the comic book or even sci-fi fantasy genre. If you were to watch the first 20 minutes of this episode, you'd think that you were renting a foreign language movie, a romantic drama, from not Bollywood necessarily, but from India or from Pakistan, and they've got some of the most beautiful movies that people aren't necessarily watching because they're not mainstream American Western culture movies. So the fact that they kind of brought a little bit of that, not just to the genre, but to the MCU, is daring. It's beautiful. It's bold. It's wonderful. Definitely want to hear all of your thoughts on that. Mike, I'd love to start with you. What'd you think?
Just the way this episode opens with that, I don't know the aspect ratio of that, but it just really takes you back. And then it slowly reveals itself to be a history lesson of sort. And that just speaks to the whole thing about what Toni was saying, that we're learning about this through a Marvel show. What's going on with our education system right here? It's already so bad that we have to learn about this. And it's what Nakia said even in episode 2, where he said, we spent 6 weeks on, Westernized history, but we spent like 2 weeks on, the partition. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so true. It just speaks to the volume of how bad our education system is. But that's besides the point. As we progress further, we see historical figures throughout it. So there is this truth to what the writers and directors are trying to say. And then we see this love story between Aisha and Hassan. And it is just so wonderful to see a romance between two brown people on a show of this level, on a streaming show, distributed by Disney, made by Marvel. It's something that we, like you guys have said, we haven't seen on anything on any other superhero show or any TV show, because they're mostly white. Let's just face the facts. So now that we're starting to embrace more of this diversity, it's just so great to see more of that, and I just welcome it, basically.
Toni, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, first off, I'm also really loving what Miss Marvel is doing with those Marvel Studios intros where
Yeah.
the
Yes.
choices have always been on point, and the fact that
Title
they went
cards,
ahead and
yes.
made it like a 1940s World War II era,
Mhm.
newsreel is like
Yes.
Brilliant.
it's
That's good.
beautiful.
Yeah.
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 It was gorgeous. But also it just kind of like it just really drove the point home of like, man, my perception of history is so Americanized because
Yes.
literally
Yes.
it's the 1940s, that's World War II era. Like I am firmly like if you ask me about like America's like role within World War II, even though I don't consider myself a World War II buff, I could probably give you a pretty good understanding of like the major moments, right? And that's just because, especially within our culture, we have a very, very big fixation of America, especially the role within World War II. But then that means that we completely ignore anything else happening during that time in any other part of the world. And there's still like a huge part of history that was happening concurrently and in parallel. So the fact that this was within the 1940s, one lets me know that it wasn't that long ago. There are definitely more than likely like still people who were directly affected and experienced this moment, even though they are definitely like at the later part of their life. The fact that the effects of the partition and the effects of those moments leading up to and after are definitely still felt within those communities, and the fact that like my view is still so narrow, and I'm always so grateful whenever any part of pop culture can like expand that understanding. I mean, we saw the same thing with Watchmen and about the Tulsa massacre, and how like that definitely had this far-reaching effect of people actually learning about that moment. So I'm really hoping that the same will be done here. And I know it definitely has been done for me. I'm already starting to research what I can here and there. Excuse me. And I'm so thankful for it, but also I'm just kind of like, what other stories do we not know about that are just like so rich,
That's
that are
many
just so
histories.
amazing? And I don't
Yeah.
want to make it seem like these historical moments now have to be mined for my entertainment, but it's also like the amount of stories that are just like not shown to us, that are just not at all like, that we're not exposed to, just because, even though like we definitely as Americans would more than likely like identify with the British because those are like the allies.
Yeah.
It just feels like, man, like this is why we need to expand who is being to tell the story. We need to expand the definition of like who the storytellers can be, and we can actually have these moments where it's like you are exposing, a larger group of people to, not just the understanding and the humanization of entire groups, but also just to say like, there's a whole big wide world that
Yes.
currently exists and did exist at one point that you're just like completely oblivious to. And I'm so thankful. So again, even if next week completely shits the bed, I'm just going to go on and I'm just going to be like, Miss Marvel's awesome. Miss Marvel's amazing. It's fantastic. I'm so glad that it's here. I'm so glad that that's an option on a major streaming platform. Even with all of its drawbacks and limitations, I'm just so happy that it's here. I really am.
I can't agree with you enough, both about the series and about the impact that the series has. Just on educating people like myself. I mean, I grew up here in the States. I was born here in the States. I grew up here in the States, and all throughout history, which I'm proud to say in elementary school I did very well in, and later years less so. But anyways, I mean, like when I learned about history and stuff like that, this was not part of it. We didn't talk about the partition. Everything I learned about the partition, which is sad, that this huge, tragic, crazy event that altered the lives of an entire culture, two cultures technically. It's going completely untold. Much like Toni, I love your example of the Tulsa massacres from Watchmen, because that was something I wasn't aware of either. Our history classes have a tendency to really, pave over things that might make America look negative, portray America and this country in a negative light. And we can't be afraid of that, because that is generally part of our history. And that doesn't really apply here with Miss Marvel, because this is more about British culture, but it's almost the same principle. substitute America with Britain, and what England did to separate everything with the Muslims and the Hindus. And to me, learning about that through Ms. Marvel, learning about the Tulsa massacres through Watchmen, I respect these works of art for actually educating me and teaching me something that I know and helping me to realize that the history of our country, the history of every country, is that the world is so much more expansive than what we're told in textbooks, and more to that, I think a show like Ms. Marvel, so many, psychos out there, and I'm going to call them psychos, I really don't care, but so many psychos out there go around going, oh, they're forcing wokeness down our throat, oh, or they're just doing this for diversity and wokeness and all that stuff. No, I mean, when you think about the basics, the fundamentals of good storytelling, the biggest and most important fundamental is that a character feels relatable and real. It's something that's lived in, and it's characters that we relate to, that we see as real three-dimensional people. And the only way to tell stories about that is by presenting these characters with histories that are tragic, that are affected by real tragedies, real life events, and everything like that. Those make the characters identifiable. So when we have a character like Kamala Khan, when we have characters like Maniba, when we have characters like Isha and Hassan, they feel real to us because the tragedies themselves are real. They're rooted in real things. They really affected people of that culture in real life. That's what it is to be a human being, and for us to relate to these characters, knowing that these things exist and exist for a lot of families out there. So it's not just a woke culture thing. It is a, expand your view and relate to these real characters and real situations kind of thing. And I can't respect, Marvel Studios enough for being daring enough to tell this story. More to that, they do such a good job of it because in 2 scenes, we understand and we're invested in the relationship between Aisha and Hassan. We love this love story. We're there for it. We barely saw anything with Aisha. We just met Hassan. And yet this is such a gorgeously beautiful love story told in 3 scenes, over a span of several years. How the hell did they get us to love these guys, these characters? Toni, go for it.
I have an answer.
Yes, please.
And it was going to be my next point.
Yes.
The other great thing about Ms. Marvel, because at the end of the day, even if we were to take a step back and, not as fans, but maybe just as people who can predict the trend that Hollywood and definitely Marvel might follow, right?
Yeah.
You're pulling in experienced actors from other genres of cinema.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the actors who, and I'm going to completely butcher these names, so I do apologize beforehand, but the actor who plays Hassan is Fawad Khan, and the actress who plays Aisha, my goodness, I'm gonna butcher this, I'm so sorry, Mawish Hayat.
Mm-hmm.
Just briefly going through their Wikipedias, these are experienced Pakistani actors, and definitely they have enjoyed success within those film genres and within Pakistani television. And it just, the wealth of talent that is outside of Hollywood and that is outside of Western Hollywood, definitely the fact that those folks might then get to be featured within future MCU projects and hopefully to even extend beyond that. I mean, that's really exciting too. And I think that's also the reason why, I think as much as we love Iman is perfect because Iman is Kamala, right? I think we all know that. We've seen the interviews and we're just you're just playing yourself, but good for you. I appreciate that. But when you're pulling in seasoned pros that can just get in there, do the job, make you fall in love with them instantly, I think that's just, of course you would. Of course you can. Get everybody on the phone that is not currently in an MCU project that has a 10, 20-year filmography from Asia and from Europe and from other areas of the world that just don't ever make it over here unless it's for the Oscars foreign language film nominees. I really do feel like it's such an exciting possibility and probability that we're going to get more of these folks that are going to be exposed to audiences in America. But yeah, totally, like, that was the right move, 100%.
100%. Mike, what about you?
More of what Toni said, but I just want to add to the fact that it's the relationship was kind of what I reminiscent of what we saw in Shang-Chi between Wen-Wu and his wife.
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, again, like what Toni was saying, getting those actors who are very well experienced, and, you know, how some who may not be familiar with, like Tony Leung, and now they see like, oh wow, you know, you see these actors, they're very well experienced, and they have the knowledge, they have the filmography, like she was saying, and it goes to show that you give them you give them that chance, you give them that opportunity, and they're gonna put like 110% into it.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you guys more. It's kind of amazing because when you think about it, to your point, Tony, there's so many good actors in the world that we're not familiar with because we're not exposed to foreign language cinema as much as we should be. And if you were to take a rock and throw it at any famous person in England or America, you'll hit someone that's in the MCU. But if you do the same thing in Asia or in Pakistan, you're not going to, unless it's Kamal Nanjiani, who's in everything.
Right.
But overall, I mean, like, there's so much talent out there and so many seasoned actors that can sell the crap out of roles like this. And we've just seen it with these two actors in this episode that made us feel the love. I think it's also not just the talent in front of the camera, but the talent behind the camera too, because this episode specifically has been an absolute revelation in how to do, the show not tell method in storytelling. I mean, in just a few frames, we're invested in this relationship because they show it to us, because we get the feeling. It's not, Hassan stopping, Aisha and going, oh, I've always wanted to get married and my wife, died, or something like that, something tragic, to get us invested. It's getting us invested in this relationship because, as you mentioned, Mike, it's very similar to Wenwu and Shang-Chi's mother. We feel like these people are regular people who fall in love, and that's literally everyone's story, and that's everybody's wish. They have a baby, they've got problems, but they go through them, and that makes it so beautiful. And another example of this, outside of even just the romance, is when their neighbor knocks on the door, and Hassan wants nothing to do with him. He doesn't want to accept any gifts or anything like that, and they're friends, and it's because his neighbor is just pretty much against anyone with the Muslim faith, and we have Aisha kind of trying to be like, you guys are friends, don't let the differences here kind of like, mess you up. That in and of itself, it told me so much about what I need to know about the Partisan without making, like spending exorbitant amount of time trying to explain it to me. You just have a scene like that, a perfectly human scene like that. And we get it instantaneously. We know it, we feel it, all of that. I mean, like, did you guys feel the same way in terms of how they were executing this portion of the show? We've already talked about how they executed the last part of it, but this portion of the episode versus the rest of it, did you guys feel like you were getting all this information without them having to explain it to you and sit down and everything like that?
I mean, the newsreel convention in the beginning did help a lot. Yeah, it did help a lot. I think kind of having a bet, and I mean, they've been sprinkling it in throughout the episodes, I think the one thing that kind of sticks out in my brain is when Kamala's father is trying to tell, and I'm so blanking on her name, and I do apologize, but it's Amir's new wife, then fiance, who's asking about the family history. And Kamala's father is talking about how his family had been well established in Pakistan for years, and that it was Maniba's family that had just been newly, immigrated to Pakistan on the last train, famously. And I just was like, well, that has to like also raise some sort of questions and some like, possible tensions between those families. Like, what was that love story like when Kamala's parents, got together for the first time? Were they already in America? Like, there's still like some questions as to like when they actually made their way over to America and for what purposes. And that's another criticism I can launch at this show, is the fact of when these things are happening in the past. Like, we get such firm answers on Aisha and Hassan, so then all of a sudden it's like all the other questions that are still left behind with the grandmother, the parent, it's like it's still lingering. But as far as their depiction of the partition, again, I am not the person to like judge whether or not this was done historically accurate, whether or not, and I'm sure with most things that are just like portrayed for the sake of entertainment and television show, I'm sure there's a lot of nuance here that is just completely glossed over. I'm sure there's going to be more than a few think pieces on the subject that I can actually come over in the next few days. And I have seen a few about how like it just seems to be a firmly like Muslim versus, Hindu, Pakistan and India versus the British rule, and et cetera. And I'm like, that feels a little reductive, and I'm sure it is.
Sure.
But as far as like giving me the broad strokes where I feel like I know what to search for, I know how to go now and research it, I know at least a few keywords that I can actually go ahead and like use to like expand my knowledge on that, I feel like it did its job. I think it's more about I'm Native American, and within Native American circles, we talk a lot about with disconnection, right? About reconnecting with your culture, reconnecting within your own culture, whether it's with your family or your tribe or et cetera. And I definitely feel like that's what I'm also seeing with Kamala, because there are questions that she even has about her own family, where she's like, I think it's in episode 3 when she asked her mom, like, what about Aisha and what happened there? And like, what about Nani? And then it's like Muniba and Nani and the grandmother don't really speak. They haven't spoken in a while. And it seems to be like an estranged relationship. So it just feels like within the episodes that are set in Pakistan, it's a lot about the reconnection and about dealing with the generational trauma that definitely has probably led to these characters being estranged, and now this like weird mystery. I'm still not quite sure when they're talking about Aisha bringing dishonor to the family. Is that because most people believe that Aisha abandoned the daughter at the train station? Right. So
Yeah.
it's like, that's a question that I still
really
have.
Explain that, because unless because obviously Muniba had no idea about Aisha's true heritage or anything like that, right. Her own true heritage or anything like that, and rolling with the clandestines, she didn't know anything about that. So I think maybe it does have to do
your question with, I'm trying to say that like there are still questions that I feel like were supposed to be answered by saying like this is all happening during the time of this great unrest and this moment of immigration and displacement.
Yes.
But it still feels like that there were answers given for questions that we didn't even ask yet.
Yeah,
if
potentially.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. A little inconsistency here and there, regarding things that we've seen in earlier episodes versus sort of the information dump that we got in this episode. I mean, nicely portrayed information dump, but still some things that are kind of gaps. Yes.
Okay, because I think we might be running out of time. I'm not at all sure how much time we've set aside for this discussion.
We have about 6 minutes left.
Okay, great.
So we're okay.
How did y'all feel about the whole Kamala being reinserted into her own family history thing? I personally loved it. I thought it was awesome. But I'm a sap. I'm a huge sucker for things like that. So I 100% accept the fact that I am not the most discerning person when it comes to like story decisions like that.
Mike?
I thought it fit well with what you're looking for is looking for you sort of thing. It fit. It made me cry when I find like, oh, it's a literal thing. It's like what she's looking for is looking for you. And she found out that it made me cry, basically, how that whole thing was executed, because it was so beautifully done. Like, oh, step on these stones, step on this hard light. Didn't work, but what it actually turned out to be was that the actual stars, and yeah, it just made me cry. I thought it was wonderfully done. So
I loved it too. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I might be hosting this show, but I'm the dumbest person on this show because like when it happened, I was like, what? She is the reason? Oh my god! And it's like it probably was the most predictable thing in the world. Maybe I don't know, but for me, I was like, oh my god, it makes so much sense. This is awesome. So I got really psyched about it because it connected really well. In my opinion,
yeah,
I thought they connected it really well. And it's such an emotionally necessary moment for Kamala as well, you know, for her to see and understand that she was the reason that, you know, that the stars that, you know, her grandmother followed were there, you know, and I love that. I thought, you know, I felt like the whole time we're led to believe that it was the grandmother's Sana. I forgot the
Donna.
Sana.
Sana, yeah. Sana. We this whole time we're led to believe it was Sana that like did it herself, or maybe Aisha who did it. But it's Kamala, and I was just like, it's such a cool like little Back to the Future kind of moment that I really enjoyed it. I dug the hell out of it, you know.
So now, because that, you know, that what you're looking for was looking for you was inscribed on it, but it seems like Hassan knew about that poem as well. So now I kind of wonder what's that connection? Like how does that poem connect to the bangle? I guess no.
That's a great question. I really hope we get answers about the bangle and about the heritage in the next episode, the final episode, just because there's so much mystery around it. We're already very invested emotionally in what the message is on the bangle, how it ties to Kamala, especially after this episode. That a little bit more information about the source of Kamala's power, really, and how this bangle works would be really appreciated, I think, in the next episode. So we have about 2 minutes left. I kind of just wanted to check really quickly with you guys to see what are you hoping out of next week. Mike, Leah, I'd start with you. We're in the end game now. We've got our final episode. You know, what are you hoping to see?
What's that group? I guess the
Damage control.
Damage control. Just get rid of that within 5 minutes. I don't care. But figure out the whole Kamran story. That now that Kamran has the power of her mom's love. Yeah, I want to figure out what's the deal with that. Is he good? Is he bad? Or you know, I just want to get some closure on that, and I'm really interested to see who cameos in this because you know it's a Miss Marvel show, and
I think we all know who's going to cameo in it.
We've been surprised and disappointed, so we'll see. Well,
I think it'll be a very breezy answer. So yeah. I don't know.
Easy breezy answer. There you go.
Breezy answer. I don't know, but probably. It's my guess. Toni, what about you? What do you think?
I'm hoping for 2 more episodes. That's what I'm hoping for. Yeah, it just unless they pull a Stranger Things and next week's episode is twice as long as every other episode that's come before and it ends up being an hour and a half, then I feel like, okay, then we might have enough time to actually pull all of these threads together into a really satisfying conclusion.
Yeah.
It does feel like they're going to rush through a lot of it.
I think so too. My
biggest fear is that Kamran is set up as the season 2 villain, that he all of a sudden does an about face and does a heel turn because you killed my mom. Like, well, okay, first off, that's really reductive of what happened, Kamran. I don't know. I wasn't there in Pakistan, so I'm just going to believe my own version of the events, and therefore I must murder you and kill you, even though I'm kind of in love with you too. But yeah, see you in season 2. I really hope that doesn't happen. I have a awful feeling that it is where we're
I
headed,
think it is too.
and I hate it.
Oh,
I worry about
I
that.
hate it.
Yeah.
I'll add one more thing. I hope Kamran says Bruno. At least says Bruno, because he's been saying Brian.
He
Even
should
though he's
now,
already-
right?
Yeah, hopefully he says it now.
He should now.
He should now.
If he apologized for calling him Brian like 50 times. So, you know.
But does that count? This is like Brian. No, it's Bruno. Don't stop saying Brian.
Maybe it's going to be a pet name for him going forward. His pet name for Bruno is Brian now because it's an inside joke. I don't know. It would be
I just don't want. Marvel always does this. They always give us a player A, player B, a red versus blue. It's always like Iron Man versus Warmonger. It's always a, I have your power, but I'm going to use it for evil kind of villain. And the last we saw, he kind of has similar light powers, and I hate it.
Yeah.
And it does feel like it's where we're going. And I just hate. I don't want to be right. I desperately don't want to be right.
I really want Damage Control to be just the main villains of this. And we kind of see what happens when government structure and paranoia about certain races and cultures really impacts and affects and, screws up people's perceptions of who the enemy is, and then since Tony's dead, I just feel like just dismantle Damage Control because they're a bunch of jerks anyway, I mean, like they harass kids. We've seen them harass kids twice already in the MCU. So I don't know. I mean, like,
I really hope that it doesn't just end on a whole Kamala versus somebody else kind of thing. I really do hope that it is a proper cliffhanger where it's like, okay, we really do have to have a season 2 in order to like do something with this show. Because if it just becomes a Kamala versus anybody fight, it's just I don't feel like that's going to be at all satisfying to anybody. But I also feel like the probability of them just like leaving this show where it stands,
probably
and then
high,
sort of rolling them into and rolling in these characters into like later MCU films as cameos, which I really don't want.
I don't want that either.
Me neither.
And since we're talking about Damage Control, I kind of feel like I forgot his name. I know him, Stewie from Succession.
I was gonna call him Stewie
from Succession. But he expressed some sort of internal struggle because, like, I can't don't show any disrespect towards the Moss and everything. And I kind of want to see more of that, like that internal struggle as a person who's also of Middle East or South Asian descent, try to grapple with the fact that he works with a government organization that has to cross these sort of lines, and where does he stand on that? I kind of wish this Marvel show explored that. So
there's a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot of ground.
There's a lot of ground to cover, and there's very little time to do it. As we saw with things like Moon Knight and everything else, they're not really fans of double-sized finales, which they should be, because it would be nice to complete a story without having to rush it. But
if Kamala blacks out and then it just like fades to credits, I'm gonna be all right with that, because then at least that's a proper cliffhanger. And
it is
get season 2 to answer questions. And I feel like Kevin Feige is much more inclined to like greenlight the season 2 when there's just a lot of unanswered questions. That's going to be my preference.
Yeah.
And lastly, I want the costume, guys. They've teased it enough. We've got the staff. We've got the mask.
Building up towards it.
Oh my God, guys! Does this mean the mom is going to make it?
What's that?
Does this mean that the mom is going to make it?
Yeah, I think so. Probably. Yeah. That'd be cute. If Maneva was the one that
so much.
I would love that too.
Bruno already contributed.
Because she is the first person to see the lightning bolt. So yeah, I think it's very possible Maneva will make that costume. That being said, as sad as it is, I'm sorry, guys. We are going to have to wrap this up. I know that we're going to have a lot to talk about next week, and I'm looking forward to that. But for now, we want to thank you all for joining us. Before we go, we'll kick it to our team. Just say goodbyes. Tony, where can everyone find you?
You guys can find me on all social media at the Toni Sanchez, Toni with an I, Sanchez with a Z, and you guys can definitely catch me at Comic-Con. I'm going to be speaking on Our Flag Means Death panel on Thursday. The time escapes me at the moment, but I will be hyping that up here in the next coming days. So yeah, definitely for that information, go follow me on social.
Nice. Mike, how about you?
You can follow me on all socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, at I am Michael J. Lee. And I won't be at Comic-Con, but who knows, you maybe, if I get, B23 approved, you'll see me there. That's way ahead. So
we're definitely looking forward to seeing you at D23, brother. And you can find me, Mike Manalo, at TidyGoldBoy182 on Twitter and Instagram, but also on the nerdsofcolor.com, whattowatch.com, and that's at LA. And also next week on our finale show. We hope to see everyone there, and thank you guys for everything. We're gonna have a lot to talk about, and till then, have a great one, guys. Thank you.